I grew up on the farm.
What did y'all raise?
Well, we had tobacco and hay and pigs for a very short period of time, and cattle and sheep. And I told God when I was 12, if he'd get me off the farm, I'd never go back. So I spent many years as a soda jerk at Clark's drugstore in Gallatin, kind of starting at 12 or 13, 14 years old, all the way through college.
I can tell you that was damn hard work, working at tobacco as a kid. I got the opportunity to learn that, and I got the opportunity to know that I wanted to go to college. I did not want to become a tobacco farmer.
I worked in cotton fields from the time I was 10 years old until I left for college. I started when I was 10, I was a water boy. And I would take buckets of water out into the fields so the adults could dip water out of the buckets and drink. And then when I became 12, I started what was called making a day. So I could chop cotton all day long, and we made a grand total of $3 a day, and we worked for 10 hours. That's 30 cents an hour. I hated working in cotton fields. Every single day that I did it, I hated it with a passion, and it motivated me to do something more with my life than stay in those cotton fields.
Well, I grew up on a dairy farm, something I wouldn't recommend to anybody. You know, those cows have to be milked every morning, every night. They have to be fed every morning, every night. If they're out in the pasture, you have to go out and round them up and bring them in. But, you know, you don't have to think about finding a part-time job when you live on a farm. We learned to take care of what we had. We learned to fix what got broken. We learned hard work paid off, and I learned that whatever I did in life wasn't going to be milking cows.
As I think about it, I don't believe I had ever met a woman lawyer before going to law school.
I served several lawyers at Clark's drugstore, where they'd come in to drink coffee and tell stories, and occasionally they'd stay much later and drink something else that was in the back room. I'm not sure what it was, but I got to know a lot of lawyer stories and just kind of on the square in Gallatin.
My first memory of what do you want to be, and I wanted to be a lawyer. Probably more than anything else as a result of my father talking about lawyers that he knew and knew of.
Back then, you didn't have daycare after school, so I would walk from the elementary school up to the courthouse and just hang out till my mother would finish work. So I was all over the courthouse growing up. If there was a trial going on in the courtroom, I would just go in and sit and listen. Criminal cases, civil. I remember as a kid watching these lawyers really go at it in court. And then they'd leave and they'd walk out together, walking down the front steps of the courthouse, talking about going to lunch or shaking hands, and they were friends. And it was also, always seemed so inconsistent how they could be at war in one room and then walk out the door and be friends.
My whole goal once I went to college was to come back to Ridgely, where I loved to hunt and to fish. And it appeared to me the only way I could come back and make a living would be to practice law. So I set my life on that course for that reason.
I thought I was going to be anything but a lawyer. I thought we had too many lawyers in the family, and I could get a will drawn, but nobody could prescribe any medicine or give me any good health care. So my plan when I got old enough to have a plan was to be a doctor.
Second semester of organic chemistry made me believe that perhaps medical school was not in the cards for me. And the curriculum was such that I could obtain a degree in social work. One of the things I had to do was to do an internship with two lawyers in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Dorothy Stuhlberg and Ann Mostoller. And it was just a wonderful experience. They made me want to be a lawyer. I saw what they did, and I think I learned from them. You could be graceful, if you will, in your approach to people, and you didn't always have to be the loudest voice in the room. You didn't have to be angry with the other side all the time, and I credit both of them a lot.
I was accepted to a couple of PhD programs, and I was accepted at several law schools, and I decided that although I thought I was capable of being an academic, I thought that I was really more of a real world person. And so I decided to go to law school, not knowing very much about what lawyers actually did.
I was a chemistry major in undergraduate school. And I got my ideal job between my junior and senior year of college, working for Procter & Gamble. But I found out that on a good day, I would see three people. I see my supervisor, I see his supervisor, and I see the mail person. And I wouldn't see anyone else. And I started thinking, do I really want to spend the next 25, 35 years of my life being this isolated? And the answer was no. I decided I was going to look into applying for law school and decided to go to Duke. So the reason I applied to law school is not because some long dream of being a lawyer or going to law school. It's because I did not think I wanted to spend the rest of my career being in my own little lab with my own little lab equipment and seeing 2 or 3 people a day. I wanted a little bit more human contact than that.
I went down to the law school and applied, and I remember Dean Overton was the one that interviewed me, and he told me that I was wasting my time, I was wasting my money, I wasn't qualified, and I literally had to beg my way in that quarter. And I started law school the summer of 1964. Not only that first quarter was I scared I was going to flunk out, I looked at every quarter like it was going to be my last, and I really worked hard.
Well, how did you do academically? What was your class rank when you graduated?
Well, I graduated #1. I don't know how I got to be #1, except I just worked hard, kept my head down, and studied all the time.
My year did have a more significant percentage of women than earlier years. And there were lots of older men who had fought in Vietnam and who had come back, and many of them had spouses and families, and they were just at a far different place in life, and their life experiences were so much greater than this young woman from Pulaski, Tennessee. And so I can remember being terribly intimidated
And they told me they'd like me to come to work for them, and offered me $400 a month, and that was big pay back then. That was probably one of the highest paid positions, unless you went with the FBI or something like that.
I went to work for him for $1,000 a month.
It was only $2,000 more than my salary had been when I was working in Boston as the secretary. And when I was in Boston, I was making $13,000 a year, and as a starting lawyer, I was making $15,000 a year.
I made $21,000 a year.
I got deeply involved in the banking legal work, and over the next 10 years, we formed 101 bank holding companies all over the state and in some other states as well. You know, we've had the opportunity to do everything to a bank you can do to a bank. You know, we've started them. We've helped them during the process where they were closed by the regulators and represented the banks and their board of directors. We've helped them merge, we've helped them buy, we've helped them sell. So it's been a terrific opportunity for all these years to be a bank lawyer. And we're doing it today.
A large part of my time has been spent in the, used to call it medical malpractice. The statute now refers to it as healthcare liability actions. And I have enjoyed that work immensely. I enjoy getting to know my clients. I enjoy getting to know the medicine of the case, if you will. The client that insures most of the providers in Tennessee, I can candidly, genuinely say they're the best client I work for. They are sophisticated users. They don't get too excited when you win, they don't get too excited when you lose.
I had three primary elections and 3 general elections, and I never had an opponent. And as a consequence, I never raised any money at all to expend on electioneering. I didn't campaign. I am a believer, obviously, in career prosecutors. I think that the public is served far better having someone who is well-trained and is kept up on the law by in-service training over the years, every year, and wants to be in that job forever.
Would you recommend municipal law to other lawyers?
Oh yeah, if you like a challenge, if you like the diversity, if you can sustain the risk, better to have a contract, but still, you know, there is political volatility.
You were very much a big part of the Nashville legal community. You were a partner in a major firm, and you chose to move to Murfreesboro.
Having the opportunity to focus on one client and being able to be it, you know, through the whole process was attractive to me. And so even though it meant a substantial decrease in income, I decided that I thought I would be happier doing that. The size of the city doesn't really correlate all that closely with the complexity of the issues you're dealing with.
My private practice just kind of continued to grow more along the lines of the personal injury litigation. Toward the end of my practice, the workers' compensation law got changed. And workers' compensation used to yield a good bit of money for plaintiffs' attorneys back in the day. Of course, domestic laws have changed. There's just been a lot of change since I started practicing law.
I found out that white-collar prosecution was really where I should be. I really had an affinity for that work. It really matched my temperament.
What made you want to become a judge?
Well, I'd only practiced law for 6 years and grown tired of it. That was quite a bit of pressure. Even when you know that you're right, things don't always turn out right, and you've got someone depending upon you that you let down. At any rate, I thought I'd be better at being a decision maker rather than an advocate. Just so I ran for the circuit court judgeship and very fortunately was elected.
Lamar looked around the room and he said, now who could I appoint to that, sort of, thinking out loud. And he looked over at me for some reason and he said, you're not old enough, are you? And I said, well, I'm 4 months past old enough. Well, later that morning, he called me in and he said, you'd be good at this. I'd like to appoint you. So when I became a state circuit judge, Carrie was 6 months old.
How long was your father Chancellor?
He started in 1965, I believe, and he retired then in 1989 because I succeeded him on the bench.
Do you think it was a help, a burden, or a combination being not only a Chancellor's son, but grandson and great-grandson, having all of those come before you?
I remember when I first started sitting on the bench, the older lawyers would come to me before a case was tried and say, now your father always did it this way. I never took offense at that because I always had an enormous respect for my dad and my grandfather.
Judge Carol Ross, who's a criminal court judge in the 10th Judicial District, called me and said, Judge Goddard's not going to live a lot longer. When you're a judge, you don't want to show any weakness or sickness because they all start rumors that you're dying and they start planning your replacement. And he said, well, he was at judicial conference and he's not looking good, so you need to be thinking about this. So I always try to look my best when I go to judicial conferences. So I thought, well, I talked to a friend and I said, what do you think? This is crazy. And he said, well, all they're going to do is tell you no. So why not apply? So I did. Was interviewed by that commission in 2004, and I was one of the 3 selected, and I was absolutely blown away to have come out of that commission. 2 months later, Governor Bredesen calls and appoints me to the Court of Appeals, and again, that was one of the most exciting days of my life. I could not believe it.
Were you excited to go to the federal bench, or
I loved the circuit court. I could have stayed there forever. But I knew that I would only have one opportunity to be a federal judge, and I knew I had better take the opportunity when it came.
I had somebody in mind when I started to be a judge that I wanted to be like, and it was Bailey Brown. Judge Bailey Brown was a federal district judge in Memphis, and he just epitomized the kind of judge that I had in my mind that would be an ideal judge. And he was removed from everybody, yet he was nice. He had a good sense of humor, but still rather stoic. I don't know, he was the kind of judge I felt like that we needed.
What was the transition like between the Court of Appeals to the Supreme Court?
I stayed in the same office. I kept the same law clerk, same staff. I had more travel, fewer cases because, I was doing about 60 opinions a year, and that dropped down to probably 15 or 20. But each case was more important and more in-depth. Working with the boards and commissions, the administrative work was very involved.
And I went in and talked to Judge Jeffery, and Judge Jeffery says, this position open, Curtis, and you really need to put your name in for that. We need people like you on the bench. And if he could see in me the potential to serve on the bench, I thought that I at least owed it to myself to at least pursue it. So it's like becoming a lawyer. It wasn't something that I had plans or goals for or set out to do. A door opened. And as that door opened, I stepped through it.
You've always been a trailblazer with being the first woman to do almost every position that you've had. How's that felt over the years?
I think the way it felt initially was that I had so much on my shoulders. I'll probably cry when I say this, but I felt like I had to do well because I knew if I didn't, other women wouldn't have those opportunities.
When we were in law school, there were more women in law school than there were women practicing attorneys. We really were the second wave of feminism. The status of women under the law and the status of women in the legal profession was something that needed attention, needed to change, could change, and some of the ways that it should change. And so that was a significant experience.
I was fortunate, my husband and I, to have a nanny. She worked for us for almost 17 years. She was my wife. I mean, she carpooled with my neighbors. She came to school programs. She made lunches for the children. She picked them up after school every day. When they began to be involved in activities, she drove them. For a while, my kids wanted rice-a-roni for breakfast. Probably not the healthiest of meals, but she would be there in time to make their rice-a-roni, and Dorothy was her name, Dot.
I remember Judge Taylor was so hard on lawyers, and I was terrified of him. The worst thing you could do in his court was ask for a continuance. One day, Judge said, I need you to go to federal court tomorrow. We're not ready on this case. We can't try it. You got to go up there and ask for an extension. Don't say continuance, say extension. I remember sitting in front of Judge Taylor's office, and Paul goes, he's going to be rough on you. This is going to be bad. And I go, I know, it's going to be really bad. So we get in there, and he goes, okay, what is it you want? What is you want? And I said, well, Your Honor, we need an extension. They've had some things come up. We need a different trial date. And he looked at Paul and he said, why are you being mean to this little girl lawyer? Why don't you give her what she wants? Why don't you give her more time? And Paul's like, it ended up jumping on Paul because he didn't agree to my extension, which Paul knew better than to agree, because Judge Taylor never granted extensions. So we walked out and we were both like, wow, that didn't go the way we thought it was going to go. So that was the one time it really helped me to be a woman, and I did not mind being called a little lady lawyer or a little girl lawyer, whatever he called me. It was so inappropriate, so sexist, but I got a trial date postponed.
And that was Judge Robert Taylor.
Robert Taylor.
Once you become a judge, you have to take your lawyer hat, your advocacy hat off, and learn how to listen. And while you may have listened as a lawyer to what your client said, you now have to listen to more than one side of the case. And you have to see through advocacy, and you have to apply fairness.
Once you go on the bench, things are different with lawyers. You don't run the same circles anymore. Tennessee Judicial Conference became my family, and I became active in it, then started teaching in the Judicial Conference, and that led to a whole new type career, which I loved.
I compare it to becoming a priest. You become a different person. People that I had known from the time that I had come here, they treat you differently. I've been invited to things. I wouldn't get invitations to things before. I used to be courteous. Now I'm judge.
You can't be involved in fundraising, for instance, so you couldn't raise funds for the Little League, and you had to be careful about other organizations. So yeah, it caused me to step back in some ways. But I think people like to see their judges out and about, and I don't think you should go hide under a rock.
Were you surprised by attempts to influence your decisions by people in the community?
I remember having made a ruling on a case involving the location of a beer store. And I came to court several mornings later, and I was met by some county commissioners, like 5 or 6 of them, sitting there waiting to talk to me about it. And one thing I always knew is you don't talk about court with other people. You don't have any ex parte conversations.
The judiciary is a separate independent branch of government. We're not subservient to the governor or the executive branch or the legislature. And the legislature controls the judiciary's budget, obviously, but we don't need to pander to the legislature. We have to do our job, and we're very important check and balance on the power of the executive branch and the legislative branch.
When I order someone to give $1 million to someone else, I don't have an army that I can send out to make the person write a check. The great majority of people do it. When I let somebody out on bond and tell them to come back to face a trial or sentencing, I don't have an army to go and make sure the person comes back. They come back voluntarily. When we ask people to come in for jury service, they come in voluntarily. We ask witnesses to show up, they do so voluntarily. And if the public starts losing confidence in the courts, they will stop obeying the courts. That means that people will stop voluntarily doing the things that judges ask them to do, and we'll have to resort to something else. Federal courts also have the obligation to resolve disputes between the other two branches of government. And that also requires voluntary compliance. If we tell the president that your administration cannot do X, we don't have the ability to make sure the president does not do X.
He's the one with the Army, isn't he?
He's the one with the Army. He does it because he assumes that the public is going to support the court. That in a dispute between the presidency and the judiciary, the public is going to support the judiciary. The same thing is true of Congress. What happens though if the public does not perform in the way that we, the courts, think the public is going to perform? That's a huge danger for us, because at almost any time we could do something. When judges ordered those kids in Little Rock to attend Central High School, the President of the United States sent in the Army to have that judicial order enforced. If the President said, well, tough luck, then not only would that order have not been enforced, but the authority of the courts would have suffered tremendously.
You know, when you do criminal work, you deal with the Constitution every day. It's a meaningful thing to think that you've got this 200-year-old document that you still apply every day.
When you write a dissent, is it philosophical? Is it the fact that you want to, you know, maybe make a statement to lawmakers about some sort of deficit in the law?
I think both. I think it's. I think when you're on the Supreme Court, you don't go along to get along. You don't just put your views aside. I think you've got to speak up when you disagree. I always try to be in the majority, but there are times when I just had to express my views, and I thought it was important to give that differing viewpoint out there. It also can be a place marker. You hope a court comes along later, will see what you wrote and be persuaded by it.
I was asked to serve as an assistant examiner for the Board of Law Examiners, where I would write a question and then grade all of the papers for that one question. But anyway, I did that for a while, and then I was asked to serve on the Board of Law Examiners, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. I did that for a dozen years. I've got to know, just wonderful lawyers across the state. And then after I finished my service on the Board of Law Examiners, then I was asked by the Supreme Court to serve on the Board of Professional Responsibility. Was there for 6 years, and I served as chair. A lot of the cases were difficult decisions.
Why has that been important to you, for you to be active with the Tennessee Bar Foundation?
Well, it's an opportunity for me to see a lot of my friends from around the state, from Memphis to Bristol, that I don't get to see very often. And I enjoy getting to meet a lot of the new, young fellows that come into it. I think what the Bar Foundation is doing with their grant program is just phenomenal. That's why I think that the Bar Foundation, IOLTA, it was needed long before it happened, and I'm happy to support it. And I'm really delighted with what they do with the money.
One of the reasons I retired early was I wanted to see who I was when I wasn't working. I wanted to keep learning. And so I've taken an array of classes at both the undergraduate and graduate level at MTSU and enjoyed that a lot.
But Susan, you don't do the auditing. You take the tests and you write the papers. Am I right about that?
That's correct. I figured, you know, if you're going to engage. I mean, one thing that has been constant, I suppose, is if I get involved in something, I get really involved.
I don't miss necessarily having to make all the decisions and rulings that I did. I do miss being around lawyers. When I first went on the bench, when the out-of-town judge showed up for docket call, there was usually an event after docket call, not trying cases, but there would be a dinner or you'd go out to somebody's farm and there'd be plenty to eat and we'd all visit and sit around. That's somewhat of the collegiality that I think is missing now. And you don't sit around with lawyers and talk about what we do as a craft or a trade or how we apply our profession to one another, and realize that we are people. And so I think those kinds of days are behind us. I think so much is done by email, not even by telephone anymore.
Before I saw the play, I read the biography of Alexander Hamilton. It took me about 6 or 8 months to get through it, but I did get through it and I enjoyed it, and it was a well-written book.
My book club, we're reading The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hell this month.
Yesterday I read The Bookwoman of Troublesome Creek.
I'm reading one right now, a Baldacci book. It's not a true story, but it sounds like one, called The Calamity of Souls.
I'm reading a great book called From Strength to Strength, which talks about people who strive and work hard in their careers, and then when it's time to step back, they're a little bit lost. They don't know what to do, but this book, I think, helps to say you can have a second. You can go from a great strength to another great strength.
You know, at the end of my career, the job I'll feel most proud of hopefully having done a credible or good job in the position is the job of district judge. That is a really, really challenging job.
I have a very firm opinion that me, you, or anyone else has a right to walk anywhere on any street in this country and be safe. And I think that I have done something in my career that will help that someday become true.
I would not have predicted this life path in high school. Through my college experience at Kenyon, I learned that things were changing for women nationally. You know, as you can see from the women in our study group, all 4 of us have been very engaged in our profession and in our community, and have taken leadership roles.
There's a whole generation of judges and lawyers who look up to you as their example. How does that make you feel?
Well, first of all, I'd say that's probably bullshit. Where in the world did you hear that?
It's written down in my notes.
Who wrote it?
I did.
Oh, you did. Well, number one, I don't mean to make light of that, and I appreciate your saying that. You know, I'm at heart just an old country boy, and if somebody wants to look up to me, I hope that I have exhibited integrity. And I hope from my perspective, I never let them down on that. I'll fail, but I don't want to let anybody down on a lack of integrity.
If you order life's important decisions, a decision to follow God's teachings probably ranks 1. I think selecting your spouse is at the top of the list. And the next one, I think, is choosing where you're going to spend your time in a employment career situation. And I've been very fortunate to have made those 3 good decisions. Now, that doesn't mean I have made plenty of bad ones, but those 3 have worked out pretty well.
That's the end of our interview.
Hallelujah.